Thank you, Mr. Chappell, and thank you all for having me. This is truly such a full circle moment, and it feels like no time at all since I was sitting where you are, so I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about my career and more broadly about the power of storytelling. So I want to start by asking all of you to look around the room, because every single person in here has a story to tell, including you. Maybe you overcame something difficult. Maybe you achieved something impressive. Maybe you know something that no one else knows, or you have a unique skill or viewpoint. Maybe you just did something amazingly selfless or kind for someone you love. It doesn't matter what it is, but everyone in here has a story if you take the time to look for it. My job as a journalist is to find and tell stories just like yours. On the surface, it may look like I'm writing about a political issue or a scientific advance or a societal debate, but really I'm writing about people and their stories. Human stories are at the heart of anything that I write, and they are the element that helps it come alive and come off the page. So I'm going to take a step back and just tell you a little bit more about who I am and my career. Mr. Chappell very kindly covered the basics, but I wanted to tell you all a little bit about how I became a journalist and why. I always loved reading and writing. From a very, very young age, I would walk around with little spiral-bound notebooks and jot down stories in them. And then as I got older, I channeled that love towards magazines in particular. I don't know if these magazines still exist, but when I was young, I loved American Girl and Girl's Life, and I subscribed to them and would rush to the end of the driveway to pull them out of the mailbox and read them cover to cover on the day that they arrived at my house. And as I got a little older, I realized that magazines could actually be not just something that I loved to read, but something that I contributed to and something that could be my job. So when I was at Derryfield, I took every writing and English class available to me, and I joined the staff of the Lamplighter, which I hope still exists, but was the student newspaper at the time that I was here. And then when I went to college at Northeastern University, I declared a journalism major. I joined the college newspaper and magazine, and just decided that journalism was what I wanted to do with my life. But even though in my college classes I learned the mechanics of how to write a journalistic article, I don't think I really understood at that time what went into it exactly, how journalists decided what to write about and found their article ideas. And that's still today the question that I am asked most frequently when people learn about what I do for a living. So I'll start by talking about that. My opinion is that almost anything can turn into an article. Sometimes an event, a current event going on in the world is obviously newsworthy because it has such a strong and immediate impact on so many people. So things like wars, elections, pandemics, things that shape the course of history are obviously newsworthy and something that a journalist is going to write about. Sometimes we write about new data, whether that's a scientific study or a poll or data from the federal government. Some new numbers or research that helps us put into context what's going on in the world. But I personally think that a lot of stories can come from less obvious places. I get a lot of my article ideas because I'm a health reporter just by wondering, what's going on with my health? Why is that happening? Why do I feel this way when this happens? Because if I have a question, it probably means that other people have that question too. I get a lot of story ideas from talking to my friends and family. And I get a lot of story ideas from scrolling social media, believe it or not, and seeing what other people are posting about and interested in. Sometimes I even get article ideas just from walking down the street and noticing something a little unusual or interesting. So these things might not seem immediately important, but I truly believe that anything can be the kernel of inspiration that leads to a good article. Of course, the challenge then is once I have that kernel of an idea, I have to convince an editor, my boss, to let me actually take the time to write that article. So most reporters and writers like me come up with our ideas and then we have to convince editors to let us write them. We call that process pitching because we're really pitching editors on an idea to get their permission and their go-ahead to actually start reporting and writing it. And a piece of advice that I got early in my career that has guided me ever since is that you should pitch a specific idea rather than a topic. And I'll give you an example of what that means. Climate change is a topic. It's extremely broad. You could take it in a million different directions. and you could never ever hope to cover every relevant detail about climate change in one article, no matter how long it is. But by contrast, pitching something like why people are flying less because they're worried about climate change, that could be an article idea. So what's the difference between those things? The second one is much narrower and more specific. It has a clear idea that you're writing about, and it has a clear narrative that will help you tell the story. Plus, it's something that you could actually hope to achieve in a relatively short amount of space. You might not cover every single detail about the topic, but you can get the basics across in an article. The second part that I wanted to say is that the second idea is timely. It speaks to this moment in time, and it's relevant right now. Whereas climate change, it's a little more ambiguous. It's hard to pin down. It also, I think, helps to think about a journalistic article much in the way that you would a good movie or book. Because of course, in journalism, the stories that we tell are true and are rooted in facts, but the tools that we use to tell them are actually quite similar to what you would see in fiction. Every good article should have a clear topic or idea or thesis that guides it, so that readers know exactly what you're writing about and what they're going to learn from the article in front of them. It should have a beginning, middle, and end, and often touch on not just the present, but also the past and the future. And it should have emotional stakes. In other words, something that helps the reader understand why they're reading this, why they should care about it, why they should take time out of their busy lives to learn about something that might be confusing or even upsetting or just quite different from what they would read on a daily basis. And the most important part, getting back to what I said at the very beginning of the talk, is that every article should have strong characters. Now, of course, these are real people in journalism, but what I mean by that is that you should have real people who illustrate the article or the issue or the topic that you're writing about and help readers connect to it on a human level. So then the logical question is, where do these characters come from? And much like coming up with article ideas, I believe that you can find characters just about anywhere, because truly everybody has a story to tell. In the work that I do as a health and science journalist, a lot of my characters are experts, whether that's doctors, researchers, scientists, policymakers, politicians. These are people who have a big fancy job title and some sort of advanced degree to help people understand a complex topic. But often the people that I write about are celebrities. They're public figures, but in a different way. They already have a platform of their own, but they sometimes recognize that by sharing their story with a journalist, they can get it out to people in a new and different way than what they could achieve by just posting on their own social media. So I saw in the display up in the upper school that you had a picture of the article I wrote about the actor Olivia Munn, which I think is a great example of this. Olivia was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple of years ago, and she told me that at first she planned to be very private about that experience. She didn't necessarily want to talk about her health in a public way. But over time, she realized that because people knew who she was and respected her, they would listen to what she had to say. And she had a really important message to get out there, because she was young and healthy and had no idea that she had cancer. But she did, and she realized that a lot of other people might be in that position too and just never realize it. So she chose to post about her experience on social media, but also to talk to journalists like me to impress upon people the importance of getting screenings and having regular checkups so that they understood what was going on with their health. And she made a really tangible impact by doing that. After she spoke to journalists like me, the National Cancer Institute actually said that she drove an uptick in use of some of their screening tools, all just by sharing her story. But of course, most of us are not celebrities like Olivia Munn, or politicians, or scientists. And that's okay, because I actually believe that the best characters often are just ordinary people who have something to say. Sometimes there are people who I find because they posted something interesting on social media, but sometimes people come to me because they feel so strongly about sharing their stories. I've written articles about people who were discriminated against in their jobs or mistreated by doctors, all because they felt that those experiences were important and that other people needed to know about them. They thought that by sharing those stories, the stories could become larger and more important. They could use them to push for change, hold powerful people or institutions to account, or just raise awareness of an issue that mattered to them. And then, of course, sometimes I want somebody to tell their story, but they don't want to. This came up all the time when I was researching my book on Juul, which, as many of you probably know, is the company that made the first really popular e-cigarette in the United States, which unfortunately became popular with the wrong people, with underage teenagers. I wanted to tell Juul's entire story in my book, dating back to the moment that the founders got the idea for this product when they were graduate students at Stanford, all the way up to the moment that teenagers started using it and getting addicted, and then to the present day, when Juul was kind of public health enemy #1 and going toe-to-toe with the Food and Drug Administration. So to do that, I wanted to find people who had either worked at the company or known the founders throughout that entire 15 to 20 year period, to get stories from each chapter of Juul's history. But a lot of the people that I approached did not want to talk to me. Some of them had signed legal documents that said they couldn't talk to a journalist about their time at Juul, while others were just nervous to have their name associated with a company that had gotten so much bad press and hurt so many people. But I needed their stories to write my book. So where does that leave you as a journalist? You have a couple options in that scenario. And the best tool I find is to just approach somebody as a person and explain to them why you think their story is important, what you feel the audience could learn from hearing from them, and what the outcome of sharing that story could be. Sometimes when you do that, the person agrees right away and is willing to be interviewed. But sometimes it's a little bit more of a process. Sometimes you have to talk to somebody what's known as off the record, meaning you can't actually write or publish anything that they tell you, but you can use what they say to guide your research or maybe confirm hunches that you have. Often if somebody is hesitant to be interviewed, whether because it's a dramatic situation like with Juul or just because they feel a little uncomfortable about putting their name out there or reliving a difficult experience, I start by talking to them off the record, sometimes multiple times. Because this allows me to just get to know them person to person, one-on-one, without the pressure of feeling like they're going to be quoted in a national magazine. And in these conversations, I really try to approach them with empathy and genuine curiosity, and patience, most of all, to just let them tell their story the way they want to and the way they think it should be told, rather than pushing them to say a particular thing that I might want to include in my reporting. Sometimes after enough of these off-the-record conversations, somebody decides, okay, they will be interviewed, they'll use their name, everything's great. Sometimes they're willing to be interviewed, but they don't want to use their name, meaning you can quote them, but you can't attribute the quote to that specific person. And sometimes they decide, it's going to stay off the record, I can't use it at all. And all of that is okay, because even if it's not the exact outcome that I hoped for, I've learned by hearing their story told to me in their words in the way that they think is important. And hearing those stories helps me understand an issue in a way that I never would without it. It also allows me to tell those stories in a much more powerful way that has a real impact. And I wanted to share with you a few examples of how this storytelling actually can have power. The first example I'd like to talk about is my reporting on long COVID. As many of you probably know, long COVID is the name for chronic symptoms that follow a case of COVID-19. These symptoms can be absolutely debilitating. Some people are in so much pain or so tired that they barely leave their beds or their homes. Some of them have to quit their jobs or struggle to care for their children and families. But doctors don't really understand why some people have this horrible long COVID experience while others recover completely after they get sick. Research is still coming together on this condition, and medical tests that we have available don't always do a great job of picking up on symptoms and explaining where they come from and why. So what that means is that a lot of people with long COVID are not believed by their doctors. They look normal on all of the test results, so doctors think they're making up their symptoms or that they're all in their heads. And when a doctor doesn't believe you, that unfortunately often has ripple effects. Sometimes your family doesn't believe you, your workplace doesn't believe you. So some people with long COVID really feel as though they've been silenced and dismissed and disbelieved by almost everyone in their lives. So whenever I write an article about long COVID, my first priority is finding a real person who can speak to that experience and what it feels like to experience that kind of mistreatment. And often when I do so, I am one of the only people who has really approached them believing what they have to say and recognizing that their story is important and should be shared. And that can be an incredibly empowering experience for them after being silenced for so long to feel like they've been given a platform to explain to the world what they've been through. The woman pictured here, her name is Erin. She was one of the people with long COVID that I interviewed. And for her, this was one of the only experiences she had had to really tell her story on her own terms. And that was powerful for her, but also for the people who read those articles. If somebody with long COVID or a similar illness reads about somebody in their shoes, they feel less alone. They feel like somebody gets what they're going through, and they see their own experience reflected back at them. Every time I write about this illness, without fail, I get so many emails from people thanking me for putting a spotlight on this illness, taking it seriously, and helping other people believe that it's real too. And sometimes they thank me because they've actually learned practical information from the reporting. You know, if somebody mentions a treatment that worked for them or a lifestyle fix that worked for them, that can have a real impact on another person's health. But sometimes stories affect more than just individuals. I learned that when I wrote one of my first big magazine pieces for Time magazine about 5 or 6 years ago. The story was about Robert Chelsea, who's the man pictured here. And Robert had unfortunately been in a horrible car accident, which left him with 3rd-degree burns over most of his body, including his face. His face had been so disfigured in the accident that doctors really could not do much to fix his appearance. And so they recommended that he go through a very rare and experimental procedure called a face transplant. What that means is that facial skin from a donor is taken and basically used to give him an entirely new appearance. That's a very rare procedure. It's not done a lot. But what made Robert's case especially unique was that he was set to become the first Black person in the United States to have this procedure. And that's a big deal because the US medical system has a long history of racism and discrimination against people of color. And that means that up to the present day, many people of color are hesitant to seek care for themselves or to take part in procedures like organ donation. So Robert, in not only deciding to have this procedure, but in being willing to talk about it with a journalist like me, was bravely making himself the face of what was literally the face of what was a very controversial issue, because he thought that his story might be able to change hearts and minds about something like organ donation. So Robert donated an amazing amount of his time to me so that I could tell his story effectively. Before he even had his surgery, he let me fly out to California to spend time with him and his family to get to know him. We stayed in touch by text and email for months after that visit while he waited for a donor. And then when he finally found a donor and was ready to go into surgery, FaceTimed with me maybe an hour before he went into the operating room, which was such a vulnerable and intimate moment. He allowed me to be there in Boston as he recovered in the hospital, and for a Time magazine photographer to come and take pictures of his new face, one of which you see here. And by doing all of that, Robert really painted such a vivid picture of what the organ donation process looked like and how it could change somebody's life, make his life so much better by having this new face that allowed him to confidently show up in public and live a normal life. And if even one person who read that article and saw what a difference this procedure had made for Robert decided that, okay, maybe they too would donate an organ, he may have saved or changed a life. And in however small a way, he contributed to making the healthcare system more equitable for everyone. And finally, storytelling can even shape laws and social norms. I saw this firsthand in my reporting on Juul and other vaping companies. I first started covering vaping back in 2017, and it might be hard to imagine now, but at that time, vaping was really a fringe issue. Not that many people knew about it, and sometimes you would see vapes on the street and not even really know what they were because they weren't all that popular at the time. So I recognized that in my reporting, it was important to not only share the facts with people of what e-cigarettes are and how they affect your health, but also to showcase real human stories, to show the impact that nicotine addiction via vaping could have on people. So I interviewed teenagers who got addicted by accident because they didn't really realize what they were doing. I interviewed teenagers who'd been kicked out of school because they got caught vaping too many times. I interviewed parents who were panicked trying to help their kids overcome this addiction and didn't know how to do so. And I even interviewed people who ended up in the hospital because their lungs had collapsed from vaping too much. And the reason that I wanted to tell these stories is to really show the human impact of an issue like vaping that, might not seem ultimately all that important on its surface. And because I did that, and other journalists did that, and other people spoke out on social media about their experiences, regulators and lawmakers listened. They understood that this was something they needed to care about and act on, and they did. In the course of only a few years, vaping went from this thing that was kind of new and not that many people knew about to a mainstream public health issue. In only a few years, I watched laws and regulations and social norms on this issue change. And today, although vaping is of course still a thing and still widespread, there are far more regulations that restrict underage use of vaping, and as a result, far fewer teenagers do it than they did when I first started covering this issue. Storytelling did not do all of that single-handedly, but it played an important part. It helped people connect with this issue and understand that they needed to act. And when they did, real change followed. So if there's one message that I really want to leave you all with from this talk, it's that stories matter. They are important, and sharing them can have real effects on the world. I think a lot of us feel sometimes self-conscious about our stories. We look around and we see people who we feel like have done more or achieved more or done the things that we want to do better, and we feel like, why should we add our voices to the mix? Why are we the person to tell this story or talk about this issue? But when we do that, we discount the importance of the experiences that we have had and the stories that we can tell. So I want all of you to remember that your story matters. Nobody has lived the exact life that you've lived or had the experiences that you've had. Nobody can tell your story except for you, because you're the one writing it. You get to decide how, when, and if to tell your story and share it with the world. And there are so many ways that you can do that. You don't have to be a writer or a politician or an activist to share your story. You can do so with art without using any words at all. You can share your story on a one-on-one basis to help somebody going through a hard time feel less alone. You can use your story to push for change in your school or in your town or in your state. You can use your story to help people see a complicated issue in a new way. Or you can just use it to help somebody laugh and smile and have a better day. All of that matters, not just for the person on the receiving end of the story, but also for you. I believe that sharing the good things in life makes them better, and talking about the bad things makes them feel a little less bad. Storytelling is such an important bridge for human connection, and human connection is deeply needed right now. So the message and the medium are up to you, but I hope you'll remember that the power of the story is universal. Thank you.